In a small consulting room in Vienna, a dog named Jofi would lie by the door and wait. She wasn't waiting for her owner. She was waiting for his patients. Sigmund Freud kept Jofi, a chow, in his office through much of the 1930s, and he noticed something he couldn't quite explain. When a patient walked in calm, Jofi stayed where she was, half asleep by the desk. But when a patient walked in anxious, even before they sat down, even before they said a word, Jofi would rise, cross the room and settle close against their leg. Freud began watching her reactions as carefully as he watched his patients' own. He started to wonder if the dog could sense the shape of a person's distress faster than he could. That was almost a century ago. We still don't fully know how she did it. But now we have a better idea of what she might have been picking up on. Because dogs, it turns out, are reading us constantly. Our faces, our voices, even our sweat. The question is, how much of that reading is real understanding, and how much is just a very old, very practical skill? Let's start with the eyes, because that's where the science usually does. In 2012, researchers Deborah Custance and Jennifer Mayer at Goldsmiths University of London ran an experiment that looked deceptively simple. They had dog owners and strangers either cry, talk or hum in front of a dog. The dogs weren't trained for this. They had no reason to respond a certain way. And yet when a person cried, real or performed, the dogs approached, not just their own owners, strangers too. The dogs didn't simply rush to whoever was making noise. Humming got far less attention than crying did. Something about the sound or the shape of the distress pulled them in specifically. Custance and Mayer called it empathic-like responding, not full human empathy, because we can't prove a dog understands sadness the way we do, but something that looks, from the outside, very close to comfort-seeking on someone else's behalf. So dogs respond to the sound of sadness, but can they see it too? A few years later, in 2015, a team led by Corsin Müller at the Clever Dog Lab in Vienna tested exactly that. They showed dogs photographs, just the upper or lower half of a human face, paired with either a happy voice or an angry one. The dogs had never been trained to match faces to voices, but they consistently looked longer at the face that matched the emotional tone of the voice they heard. A happy voice pulled their gaze toward a smiling mouth. An angry voice pulled it toward furrowed eyes. The dogs were doing something we used to think only primates could do, combining two completely different senses into a single read on how someone felt. That's remarkable on its own. But it still doesn't explain Jofi, because Jofi reacted before her patients said anything at all. This is where the most recent research gets strange and a little unsettling, in a good way. In 2022, a researcher named Clara Wilson at Queen's University Belfast ran a study that didn't use sound or sight at all. She collected breath and sweat samples from people right after they'd done simple arithmetic under time pressure, a task designed purely to spike stress, alongside samples from the same people at rest. Then she had trained dogs sniff the samples, with no other cues available, no faces, no tone of voice, just scent. The dogs picked the stress sample correctly in the vast majority of trials. Across the group, accuracy averaged in the 90s. The dogs weren't reading body language, they were reading chemistry. Human stress changes the compounds in our breath and our sweat, shifts so small we have no way of consciously noticing them in each other. Dogs notice. Some of them notice in seconds. Put that next to Jofi, and her timing starts to make a different kind of sense. A patient walking into Freud's office wasn't relaxed yet. Their breath had already changed in the elevator, on the stairs, in the waiting room. By the time they crossed the threshold, The air around them was already telling a story. Jofi didn't need to see a tear. She'd already smelled the morning. Is that empathy? That's the part scientists are still careful about. A dog moving toward a crying stranger and a dog detecting cortisol in someone's sweat could be two completely different mechanisms wearing the same coat. One looks emotional, the other looks chemical. But here's the harder question researchers keep circling back to. Is there really a clean line between the two? Humans also read each other's stress through smell, through subtle shifts in voice pitch, through micro-expressions we never consciously register, and we still call the result of all that an emotional response. Maybe the difference between a dog's empathy and our own isn't a different process at all. Maybe it's just a different name for the same ancient trick, run through a nose instead of a frontal lobe. What we do know is that this sensitivity isn't universal across every dog in every moment. Breed, individual temperament, and the strength of the bond with a specific person all change how strongly a dog responds. A dog raised closely alongside one anxious person may calibrate to that person's specific baseline, picking up on changes a stranger's dog would miss entirely. That's likely part of why service dogs, trained for psychiatric support, can be tuned over months to a single handler's earliest signs of panic, long before the handler consciously feels it coming on. There's also a limit researchers are honest about. Most of these studies measure approach, attention, or accuracy in a sniff test. None of them can put a thought into a dog's head and confirm what, if anything, the dog believes is happening to the person in front of it. We can measure the behavior. We can't yet measure the understanding behind it if there is one. That gap is still open, and it might stay open for a long time because it's the same gap that makes consciousness hard to study in anything that can't tell us in words what it's thinking. So we're left with a strange, comforting kind of uncertainty. We know dogs hear the difference between a cry and a hum. We know they can match an angry voice to an angry face. We know some of them can smell stress before we've admitted it to ourselves. What we don't know is whether any of that adds up inside a dog's mind to something we'd recognize as concern. Maybe that's not the point. Maybe what matters is what happens next, on your worst evenings, when you haven't said a word and you feel a weight settle against your leg anyway. Jofi never read a single study. She didn't need to. She just kept showing up at the door, a little early, every single time someone needed her there. Before a word was spoken, she already knew. Now, almost a century later, we're only just beginning to understand how.